All right, so we're going to start absolute value inequalities. And inequalities means these symbols. You'll see a greater than symbol, less than symbol. Those are inequalities. Basically, we're not doing equations anymore. Equations have equal signs. We're not doing equal signs, okay? So what we have this first example, this says the absolute value of x is greater than or equal to 7. This is the greater than symbol, greater than or equal to. Or equal to, okay? That's what that symbol is. So basically, guys, we're going to go to number 7, and this will be a closed circle at 7. The reason why it's closed is because we can equal 7, okay? And I want the numbers that are greater than 7, so that would be to the right of 7. So draw an arrow to the right. That means x can be any number that is bigger than 7, okay? Now, guys, remember, we're talking about absolute value here. We want to know what things have a distance greater than 7 away from 0. So quick question, guys. Everyone put a point at -7. Do you guys remember what the absolute value of -7 is? It's 7. What's the absolute value of -8? So guys, these numbers are also absolute value bigger than 7. These negative numbers like -7, -8, -9, -10, those have a large distance from 0. So right now, we're looking for numbers that are more than 7 spaces away from 0. Okay, does that make sense? So these numbers over here on the negative side, like -7, 8, -9, -10, those are more than 7 spaces away from 0. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what this one looks like. So whenever we have a greater than symbol, our arrows are going to face away from each other. All right, let's look at the next case. When we have less than or equal to, we want numbers that are only 4 spaces away from 0 or shorter or less than that, okay? So that would include numbers between -4. So let's put a point at -4 and 4. All the numbers between -4 and 4 are less than 4 spaces away from 0. That's what we're looking for. Does that make sense? Okay. So for example, -2, that's only 2 spaces away from 0. -3, that's only 3 spaces away from 0, okay? So we want up to 4 spaces away from 0. So guys, whenever you have a less than symbol, you will have a point, 2 points, and they'll be connected by a line. When you have a greater than symbol, you'll have 2 points, but the arrows will be facing away from each other, okay? All right, so those are our notes. Let's go to our steps on how to solve these type of problems. Okay, so our first step is the same. We're going to isolate the absolute value expression. Then we're going to create 2 cases. We're going to keep one, and we're going to do the opposite for the other, just like we did the other day, okay? Then we're going to solve and graph it. So I'm going to walk you through a step. This is question number 3. I thought this looked difficult, or I thought maybe people would find it difficult, so we're going to do this one first. Is my absolute value isolated? Yes. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go to step 2, which is create 2 cases. So I'm going to do keep it, switch, switch, and I'll show you what that means. The first one, my first case, I'm just going to keep what I have. So -5 plus k divided by 3 is greater than or equal to 1. That's my first case. I kept it. The next case, I'm just going to switch everything. This will stay the same, however. -5 plus k divided by 3. What I'm changing is the symbol and the number. Okay? That's why we call it the KISS method. Keep it, switch, switch. Okay? So those are my 2 cases. One stays exactly the same, The other one, you switch the symbol and you switch the number. Okay? Now we're just going to go ahead and solve. So first, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Some of you guys are used to seeing a +5 and then crossing it out. You can do that step. So now I'm left with k divided by 3 is greater than or equal to 6. This says k divided by 3. The opposite of that is to multiply both sides by 3. So my answer is k is greater than or equal to 18. So that is my first case. Okay, so let's go ahead and graph this. Go to 18. What kind of circle am I going to draw at 18? Closed, because there's an equal sign. So I'm going to put a closed circle at 18. And this is the greater than symbol. So what numbers are greater than 18? To the left or to the right? To the right. So draw an arrow this way. Okay, now let's do the second case. Again, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. That cancels out. And I'm going to add 5 to this side. So I have k divided by 3 is less than or equal to -1 plus 5 is 4. This says k divided by 3. So the opposite is to multiply by 3. So multiply by 3 and that cancels. So I have k is less than or equal to 12. That's my other answer. Now we're going to graph it. So go to 12 on your number line. I'm going to put a closed circle. And this says k is less than or equal to 12. So the numbers that are less than 12 are going this way. Okay, now let's talk about interval notation. We're just going to talk about all the all the k values that are here. So guys, always start on the left-hand side. On the left-hand side, there's an arrow. What does an arrow mean? Yep, it's pointing to -infinity. So that's what I'm going to write first. And then let's continue moving to the right. There's something at 12. So I'm going to put 12 there. This will be a bracket. Closed circles have brackets. So maybe at the top of your paper, guys, write this reminder. When you have lines underneath, you will use a bracket. When you don't have lines underneath, you'll use parentheses. Whenever you see an infinity symbol, you will use parentheses. Okay? So keep that note. Write that somewhere on your paper. Okay, now let's do the next one. This is the and symbol in math. It means union. That's just an and symbol. It means union in math, okay? And then we go to 18. That'll be a bracket because that's a closed circle. And I have an arrow. It goes off to infinity. Remember, infinities have parentheses. So that's how you write the interval notation. The k values are from -infinity to 12, and it includes 12. And then it picks up again at 18. It includes 18, and it goes to infinity. All right, let's do another example. So these are the steps again. We got to make sure it's isolated. So looking at number 9, it doesn't look like my absolute value is isolated. There's things outside of the bars. So that means it's not isolated yet. So we need to work towards isolating it. So my very first step, I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. 7 minus 7 is 0, so that cancels out. 37 minus 7 is 30. Everything else can just come down. Okay, we're almost isolated. We need one more step. We're going to divide this side by 6 and divide this side by 6. So I have the absolute value of negative 5n is greater than 5. We got 5 because 30 divided by 6 is 5. Now my absolute value is isolated. There's nothing outside of those bars. Okay, so that means we can move on to step 2. So let's remind ourselves what step 2 is. Step 2 is to create 2 cases. So we're going to keep the first one and we're going to switch, okay? So my 2 cases. I'm going to keep this, so I'm going to have negative 5n is greater than 5. That's my first case. You just keep what it is. My next case, I'm going to switch the symbol and change the number. Switch it, switch it. Switch the symbol, switch the number to a negative. Now we're gonna solve. So I'm gonna divide this side by a negative 5 and divide this side by a negative 5. So I have n, 5 divided by negative 5 is negative 1. The important thing you need to remember is whenever you divide by a negative, the sign changes. So please write that on your paper. Put a little star over here. If you multiply or divide by a negative, switch the sign. Please write that somewhere. Please write that somewhere. So because we divided by a negative number, we switch the sign. All right, let's go ahead and graph this one. You're going to go to negative 1. Are we going to do an open circle or a closed circle? Open, good, because there's not an equal to sign. And this says n is less than negative 1. So the number is less than negative 1 are this side on the left. All right, let's do the next case. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 5. Did I divide by a negative number? Yeah. So now I switch the sign. So this will be n is greater than negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. So on my number line, we're going to draw an open circle at 1, and the numbers that are greater than 1 are to the right. Now we can do the intervals. Always start on the left side. On the left side, we see an arrow. What is that arrow pointing to? Negative infinity. Then let's continue moving. We stop at negative 1. At negative 1, will I put a parenthesis or a bracket? Nope. Parenthesis. Let's write this note again. If you have an open circle, you use parentheses. If you have a closed circle, you use a bracket. If you have an infinity, you always use parentheses. Okay, then we're going to use the union symbol. The next thing is 1. So put a parenthesis at 1, and this goes off to infinity. All right, I have one more example for you. Number 10. Is this one isolated? Absolutely not. There's many things outside of these bars that we need to get rid of before we start. We need these bars by itself. So we need to get rid of these numbers. So what I'm going to do first, I see a -1. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. -21 plus 1 is -20. Everything else can come down. Now I'm going to divide everything by a -4. -20 divided by -4 is 5. Did I divide by a negative just now? I did. So what do I do to my symbol? Flip it. Remember, if you didn't write this already, you need to write it on your paper. If you divide or multiply by a negative, switch the sign. You should have written that already. Okay, so we divided by a negative number, so we had to flip our sign. And I'll bring this part down. Finally, is anything outside of my bars? No. So now I can do step 2. Step 2 is to create your 2 cases. So when you do your 2 cases, you don't need those bars anymore. You don't need the absolute values. So my first case, you just write it down again. X plus 9 is greater than or equal to 5. The first case, it just stays the same. The next case, you write X plus 9 again, but this time you change the sign, you change the other side. So this was a +5, now it's a -5. So these are my 2 cases. And I will subtract 9 from both sides. Five minus 9 is -4. Next one, subtract 9 and subtract 9. X is less than or equal to -14. So let's draw our symbols. So X is greater than or equal to -4. I'm going to go to -4 and put a closed circle there. I want numbers that are bigger, greater than -4. That's to the right. Next, X is less than or equal to -14. Go to -14, and you want to go to the left. Okay. So always start on the left when we're doing our interval notation. On the very left, what do we see? An arrow, and what is that arrow pointing to? -infinity, so that's the first thing you put. The next thing we see is a closed circle at -14. If you have a closed circle, what do we use? A bracket. Then we're going to do our union symbol. That means and in mathematics. Next thing we see is a closed circle at -4. That would be a bracket at -4. And the last thing we see is an arrow, and that arrow is pointing to infinity. So that's how you do the interval notation. All right. I believe I did not do an example where you won't have the arrows facing away from each other. So let me do example number 6 with you. Actually, let me do an easy one. I'll do example number 2. So this is number 2. So this is 2v minus 3 is less than 19. So guys, is my absolute value isolated? So now we can go ahead and create our 2 cases. The first case, you just copy it down. 2v minus 3 is less than 19. My other case is 2v minus 3, but this time, change the sign, change the number. And now we just do algebra. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. 19 plus 3 is 22. Divide both sides by 2. Did I divide by a negative number? No, so the sign will stay the same. I have v is less than 11. Now let's do the next one. Actually, let me just go ahead and do my number line. I'll say this is 0. I'll say this is, let's just say 11's right here. Ignore those points. And I'll put 12 there. We don't have to be exact, but let's say 11 is right there. I want an open circle at 11, and I know it's going to go this way. I want numbers less than 11. So draw a circle at 11 and an arrow to the left. Next, let's do the next equation, or inequality. Add 3 to both sides. Negative 19 plus 3 is negative 16. Then we'll divide both sides by 2, and you get v is greater than negative 8. Did I divide by a negative just now? No, I divided by a positive 2, so the sign will stay the same. Now just go to your number line. Let's say negative 8 is right here. So you're going to draw an open circle at negative 8. And this says v is greater than negative 8. That means you need to go this way. Oh, and guys, these arrows are facing each other. So just draw a solid line. Okay? So that is what that graph will look like. You can be any number between negative 8 and 11 because you want to be smaller than 11, but greater than negative 8. So those are the numbers between these two. Okay? So that's how you would graph it. Now, if you want to do the interval form, to do the interval, always start on the left. What number is on the left? Negative 8. It's an open circle, so it'll be a parenthesis. What number is on the right? 11, and that's an open circle, so a parenthesis. So that is how you do the interval. Yep, just one. So guys, whenever you have a less than symbol, when you have a less than symbol, your graph will look like this. On the previous ones, we had greater than symbols. That's why they faced out, away from each other. Make sense? All right. So I'm going to let you guys practice.